if you have not been here before in these, live streams that we do, like for it to be very interactive. Follow me on Twitter, obviously. A lot of the things that I discuss on stream, I'll have little comments or whatever on Twitter pretty frequently on these various topics. So, you can get my first takes there. And also, video announcements and stuff we're working on, always put on Twitter. So, like I said, I like it to be pretty interactive. You guys can leave chat questions. I'll be responding to chat, talking to chat throughout the entire stream. Usually, during the live streams, we'll do various topics of discussion, or I'll read an article or, some piece of news that I saw on Twitter, react to other YouTubers' videos, etc., etc., etc. But if there's something that you specifically want me to take a look at, join the Discord, and you can send that to me directly. I can pull it up on stream and react to it, read it, give you my take, etc., etc. So, yeah. Anyway, thanks for joining, everyone. We are today going to be discussing a few different things. We're going to be spending a pretty decent amount of time talking about the MCU Canon debate, Daredevil, Kingpin, Hawkeye, Spider-Man No Way Home, what's going on with the rest of the Defenders, what's up with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Cloak and Dagger, Agent Carter, etc., etc., Inhumans. We're going to talk about what is canon to the MCU, what we think is canon to the MCU, and sort of all of the drama surrounding that. There was a lot of stuff this week that, I was on the front lines for, essentially, because I was looking through the Marvel.com page and found, for, doing research for videos and stuff, and found that Kingpin's picture on the bottom of his profile was the image of him from Hawkeye, which is pretty important, pretty big news for people that are trying to determine, what actually is canon. Is the entire history of Daredevil and the Defenders that people love so much going to be part of the greater MCU, in complete totality? So that was pretty important. So, on his character profile page, and I can bring it up, you have his entire history as is shown in the Marvel Netflix series. There's nothing added for him for Hawkeye yet, as far as, information. But underneath all this, you have an image of Wilson Fisk in his Hawkeye outfit. So obviously all of this here is the end of Daredevil Season 3. Clearly, this is all of his history within the Daredevil series. And boom, here at the bottom is our boy Wilson Fisk. Now, what's interesting about this, and what the big drama was, is if we pull up Daredevil's page, and we take a look at this. This is all of his Daredevil history, seasons 1, 2, and 3, plus Defenders. There's the beginning of season 3. You get all the way to the bottom. And then here now is the end of Daredevil season 3. Now, a couple days ago, when I was looking through this for information for videos, they had a blurb about him being in No Way Home. So that felt, at least to me, like a pretty concrete confirmation that all the Defender series would just be straight up canon to the rest of the MCU, even though I already believed it before this information, was published to the Marvel website. I was already a proponent that it was canon, and I've talked about it in my other videos, including Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Cloak and Dagger, Agent Carter. All of that is like explicitly connected to one another within sort of like the TV offshoot of Marvel before the Disney Plus shows, right? And then all of those were also connected, tangibly to the films in one way or another, right? There's a million different examples of this, but, Nick Fury shows up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Obviously, Agent Carter is a direct spin-off of Captain America the First Avenger, and in Captain America the First Avenger, obviously Agent Carter's in that. It follows the direct events of that story. And the Jarvis that's in that show is also in Endgame. Same actor. So there are these tangible connections between Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, and the movies, like, directly. And then obviously all of them connect the TV shows, as well in some form or another. Especially Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. connects to Agent Carter. We have direct crossovers between those two franchises. There are episodes of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that are basically Agent Carter episodes. And then, of course, all of that is connected to all of the appearances that Carter has in the movies. And then following all of these different threads, there's dark matter in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 2, which is connected to Cloak and Dagger, and the Dark Force, which is directly connected to the Dark Dimension. That's where the Dark Force comes from. The Dark Dimension is obviously, in Doctor Strange, it's like the main driving force behind it, trying to bring Dormammu's Dark Dimension to Earth. So all of that is connected. And again, these are tangible connections, right? Morgan Le Fay spends time in the Dark Dimension. It's specifically called the Dark Dimension. And again, the Dark Force connects to Agent Carter, which connects to Cloak and Dagger. Cloak and Dagger show up in the Runaways. The Runaways have explicit references to Doctor Strange. So all of this evidence, led me to believe that these were canon. And they were never treated as non-canon at any point by Marvel Studios. Multiple times they tried to usher in the TV show characters onto the big screen. And they even tried to write the Defenders into Infinity War, but thought that audiences wouldn't understand. Like, they were going to be one of the portals. Or sorry, not one of the portals, but they were going to be in the movie. So yeah, a lot of like direct in-universe evidence, and we haven't even started talking about out-of-universe evidence. And I have a couple guys who have been on the channel before. I've been on their channels. The Chadwick and Crisis, who are also, pretty knowledgeable in the whole canon discussion. So we're going to get into a lot more outside evidence as well as in-universe evidence, which I've already covered like pretty extensively. And then obviously I'm going to see what Chad has to say as well. But both Crisis and Chad are here. They should be able to hear you. Oh, no, they weren't. That was my bad. They can hear you now. They can hear you now.
People can hear me now? Okay. So what I was saying is that, let me make sure I can. Okay. Observing people who believe that the shows aren't canon, you look at, we go back from the beginning to around 2015, as the shows were rolling out, and the main thing that people would say at the time is, well, they haven't crossed into the movies. They're not canon unless they show up in the movies. Daredevil wasn't involved in like Civil War or all these things, et cetera, et cetera, and they would say certain things like, oh, well, who would Tony Stark sooner recruit? A 15-year-old who can stop a car, or Daredevil who's like a grown adult. Like I've heard these things, and obviously you can argue Spider-Man is definitely more effective in Civil War in that scenario, but the core of that argument is, well, they're not in the movies. But now Charlie Cox's Daredevil is in the movie. He's in No Way Home, and Kingpin is in Hawkeye.
Right.
So that happens, but now it pivots again. It's like
change.
They're still not satisfied because they'll say, "Oh well, there's the multiverse, so they're variants. So we don't know if all the Netflix shows are canon to like the Matt Murdock that we see in No Way Home," which again is like it's guilty until proven innocent. And I've seen certain people, and I doubt this is all people, but so many people are like they just will never believe it. I saw a Twitter comment on a thread regarding the Marvel.com incident you referred to, where they just said they aren't canon and they will never be canon. So it's just impossible for some people to accept. And somebody brought up Mr. Metal Horse in the chat. The Battle of New York is literally a plot point in Daredevil. That's true, and you strike me as a logical, normal person, because a logical, normal person would see that. They'd see it's a plot point. The narrative, like impetus for Daredevil season 1 is Kingpin and his cohorts are, taking advantage of the destruction caused by Loki. And so you go like, oh, well, okay, then clearly it's canon. But somebody who, and me and Garrick have talked about this, either they haven't watched the shows and feel like they don't want to have to do that to get all of the universe, or they just, for whatever reason, they'll pivot the argument. They'll say, well, because they're not normal, it's not a normal thing. They'll go, well, that's just an alternate universe. That's a variant universe where Avengers 1 is canon to Daredevil, but not vice versa. And that's just one example of the weird arguments and counter logic that some of the detractors try to make. But yeah.
What do you think the most convincing evidence for the show's being canon is? Do you think it's all the myriad of in-universe connections, or do you think it's an outside statement, something directly said by somebody at Marvel Studios, or some piece of information in an article, or something an actor has said?
For me, it's two things. The two biggest pieces of evidence is in around 2015, 2014, Kevin Feige, and you can find this video. If you look up Kevin Feige Phase 3 Q&A, it's towards the end of the video. He is being asked on camera, you can hear his voice. Somebody in the crowd asks him, could the Netflix show up in Infinity War? Because this was around the time where it was Infinity War and Infinity War Part 2. And we know that Infinity War and what would become Endgame, they were filmed and written simultaneously. Mm-hmm. And they would have had to have plans for what was going to happen in those movies. So at that same time, Kevin Feige answers the question by saying, so many characters are in Infinity War, and it's a matter of time. It's a matter of how much time can we dedicate to those characters in the movie. But regardless of that, regardless of how far out on the edge of the universe that they are, talking about the Defenders, he says that they are in the same continuity. And continuity just means order of events, like a continuum, like, second after another. So that's to me, pretty blatant statement. Kevin Feige, people consider him an architect of the MCU, says they're in the same continuity. And this is before any multiverse thing was ever incited. In fact, Kevin Feige has actually said, because somebody asked him, it's interesting, they asked him around the time that Doctor Strange was coming out, with the Ancient One, they asked him, hey, are there other universe where there's like what we'd eventually get with What If? And he basically said, there are other dimensions, but as far as like, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, but as far as like, Captain America, if he were Iron Man, like those kind of what if things, he's like, we're not there yet. So, but at the same time, acknowledging that, he says, yes, the Defenders are in the same continuity.
Let's pull the video up. I have it here, so chat can see what we're talking about.
Yeah, we can actually just watch it live.
So this is the video Crisis was talking about, right? This is it?
Let me...
Full Marvel Studios Q&A with President Kevin Feige about MCU Phase 3.
Yes, yeah, that should be it exactly.
You talked about how you want to keep making the movies, the TV is the TV, but when you have something like Infinity War,
I'll have returned
to really impact the entire universe conceptually, is there room for the Defenders to show up on the big screen in an Infinity War movie?
The Netflix series are leading to a Defenders series, and Devin is asking, is there room to include them into the features at some point if Infinity War is going to be big? There are a lot of people from the movies in Infinity War. A lot of it is about space, and a lot of it is about, you know, just what happens between now and then. But all of those things inhabit, however far on the outskirts, the same continuity. So certainly that opportunity exists.
Well, there you have it. That's pretty black and white to me.
Yeah, and I think the average person would see that and be like, all right. But
okay, cool.
Some of these people aren't average. Some of these people are very off the beaten path. But so there's that. And to me, I think that would be the end of it. But from there, because some people will say, and it is true, that was a long time ago. And obviously things change and directives change.
Right.
I wouldn't use that. I'm not saying that just saying things are prone to change is an argument to say, well, this is for sure changed, his opinion here. But I think fair point. If we look at Hawkeye, very recent, if we look at D'Onofrio's statements, he has said that he said in an interview, they or we, so you can only assume the producers, the writers, and so forth, the people who would have a say in it, are treating Daredevil seasons 1 through 3 as their Kingpin's backstory.
Right.
And
which also goes hand in hand with the in-universe connections, which we were talking about earlier. Obviously, Daredevil in season 3 had taken down Kingpin's criminal organization. Well, he did that in season 1, but severed all his ties basically to the FBI, everything else in season 3, and he was forced to go to the tracksuit army, which is why they kind of suck. He has a limp because he was injured by Bullseye, significantly. That's why he has a limp. So, like you said, the backstory is there not just by word of mouth. It's apparent and shown to us in the series that this is pretty consistently following the same narrative.
Right, and in fact, the writers of or producers of Hawkeye, for I think the final episode, they were asked if the show would clear up the nature of whether Daredevil was canon or not. Mm-hmm. And he said, look for the finale should clear that up. And if you watch the finale, you'd watch it and maybe on the first go around you go, well, I'm not sure what they could be referring to, but watch it again. They make a very specific point to show his cufflinks, the cufflinks that Vanessa gave him, right. And we see them. He has them still on his suit, and that is what Kate Bishop uses to defeat him. And we see it fly right up into the frame of the camera. It's right. It's very. You cannot deny. Are they the exact same cufflinks? Now, I feel like it's worth talking about this because I've seen this a lot. Jag Deep Rye. In the chat, MCU Kingpin has super strength. Now,
I mean, regular Kingpin has super strength. He can bench like
exactly.
500 pounds, like multiple reps.
Yes, exactly.
he's pretty strong.
He's pretty jacked. And D'Onofrio initially said regarding Daredevil and regarding Hawkeye, he said there are some things, and the Marvel writers are really good at it, where they try to connect the dots between everything, but some dots can't get connected. which would, to me, I would look at it and go, here's the comparison that I would plug that statement into is let's look at Incredible Hulk, right? So that movie is kind of the black sheep of the MCU continuity. Kevin Feige said it was canon in like 2009, so likewise he did for the Defenders and the TV shows.
Yeah.
But there's not many, the actor got recast. We never saw the leader again. There are some plot lines from that movie that are just never going to get continued. Similarly, because of most likely contractual reasons. So likewise, why the Netflix characters couldn't necessarily cross back and forth, but at the time. But regardless, we have General Ross in Civil War. Mm-hmm. That is a line connected. Now, in Hawkeye, we don't necessarily learn everything that Kingpin's been doing since then.
Well, I mean, Ross also shows up in Iron Man.
No.
No, Tony Stark shows up in Hulk.
That's true. That's true. Tony Stark shows up there.
That's what I mean.
But as far as connecting it later on, those dots are being connected, but it's not like there's not a lore dump in Hawkeye or No Way Home being like, man, this reminds me, Peter, of when someone I knew was framed for murder and had their reputation tarnished.
Right. But there's also not really that in the Incredible Hulk example either. Like what's the most we get out of any of like Hulk's backstory? Like the reference to him like trying to commit suicide at one point,
which is a deleted scene from the Incredible Hulk. So
right, and then nobody other than Thunderbolt Ross from his previous life is ever mentioned in no events or anything like that. Abomination's in the verse now, but
redesigned.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But people still.
Meanwhile, Charlie Cox is the same. He's identical.
It's the guy. So it's.
But yeah,
it's odd.
Because the thing about Kingpin being stronger, D'Onofrio said that, and then he said one of the lines they couldn't connect was his power level, and I think I can speak for Garrick as well that when topics like this come into the zeitgeist, we laugh because we've looked into the MCU power levels. Pretty much every day we talk about it. So he said that, and he was talking about, you'd assume how he gets shot by an arrow and just shrugs it off, and the explosive arrow doesn't, kill him. He gets hit by a car, pulls a car door off, all these things. But then later he said, no, yeah, actually I think it's the same, because I just watched the Daredevil fight where I'm throwing him around, and I think it's pretty much he retracts that.
Yeah, right.
And then, if that bleeds into our territory, because think about, for one, how durable Daredevil is in the Netflix universe, in the show, that is to say the MCU. Mm-hmm. Just trying to specify. He said Netflix universe. But there's nothing that happens in Hawkeye in terms of numbers, in terms of like what you could calculate that's that far off from what Kingpin was doing anyway. And like Garrick said, he's like maxing out in the prison gym. He gets stabbed and shrugs it off in that exact same scene. Yeah. Daredevil's suit is bulletproof, but Kingpin can shatter Bullseye's spine through it.
Daredevil gets shot in the arm by like a sniper rifle and keeps fighting. Like it's realistic, quote unquote, but like not that much. It's more grounded, but it's still in line with how the MCU has been portrayed thus far, at least in my opinion. So I think I think the most definitive case to be made is for Daredevil. I think most people have probably conceded Agent Carter, but there are still some people talking about the ending, what really happened, because you can't change the future using time travel, and Agent Carter was in a pretty serious relationship in season 2, but eventually ends up with Cap, yada yada yada. So some people like to bring that up, but I think the strongest case is for Daredevil, definitely. But if Daredevil's in, then everyone else is too. Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, Punisher, Iron Fist, they're all in. They They have to
Yeah.
be by default. And there's not much like tangible connection between them and the movies just yet, but certainly none of these series really function without the other based on Defenders.
Yeah, all of the, like, Daredevil season 2, you can't, if you watch Daredevil seasons 1, 2, and 3, you're missing out on the full, like,
Defenders, each series has a season that follows Defenders explicitly, and they reference each other following it as well. But like you said, Daredevil literally can't function without the events of Defenders.
Like, you'd watch season 2 and then start 3 and be like, why is why do you get,
Why is he blown up?
Yeah, why is he blown apart? Who are the friends that could help him that he's like not going to talk about? And then from there, Luke Cage and Karen Page are referenced in Runaways. Cloak and Dagger connects to that show. And then obviously Agent Carter is in the proper MCU, full stop. And they even threw the TV fans a bone. And Agent Carter 2, because here people have this big misconception. And I love James Gunn. The Suicide Squad is one of the best DC movies in years. Guardians.
Yeah, this is a big piece of evidence that naysayers like to use for sure.
Yeah. Unfortunately, he is just incorrect. And what he said is Kevin Feige didn't have any communication or connection to the TV shows. And I believe Agent Carter was even mentioned in that tweet exchange that James Gunn had with a fan about, MCU and DCEU TV shows now, or recently. So, the matter of fact is, and this has all been documented, for one, Kevin Feige orchestrated all of the proper, like, big screen characters showing up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So Sif, Nick Fury.
Sam Jackson just said, Kevin asked me to do it, so I did it. Like, that's just a statement that's out there.
Yeah, so that's not true. Kevin Feige had his hand in those shows. Marvel Studios had to approve or reject concepts in those shows, so they did have communication. In fact, in the final seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and this is another point too, I mean, it builds a case, and it's tangential, and I think that's another thing too, is it just, when you have an argument, you have to look at it as all the evidence holistically. And, like I said, you present a case, you're Matt Murdock, you throw that file down on the desk, you're like, here it is. And we have Kevin Feige working on the shows in that manner. We have Marvel Studios having to reject and approve concepts. And then even the final seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and this is something, like I said earlier, that people get hung up on, is, hey, they didn't cross over with the movies a lot. In the final season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., they're doing time travel, they're doing all these things, and the reason why, they knew the plot of Infinity War. And again, these are all statements that exist, they're all out there. They knew the plot of Infinity War. They did not go near that territory, and Endgame as well, because they don't want to spoil the movies, because they're two different, their schedules aren't aligned in terms of the production. So if they were to do something explicitly tied to Infinity War, television airing dates get shifted around and changed, and they don't necessarily line up in terms of release orders, so they don't want to spoil it. But we have that, and then Agent Carter is another big example where Agent Carter, Kevin Feige explicitly said that because of Haley Atwell's involvement, he was actually more hands-on. And the writers for the first Avenger, Captain America the First Avenger, Infinity War, and Endgame wrote the pilot for Agent Carter, because I believe they also wrote the one-shot that sprung off, the show spun off from that.
Yeah.
They wrote the pilot, and they oversaw and worked with the writers and directors for the whole show from that point forward, and Kevin Feige was also involved. And I believe, in fact, and this is also documented, Kevin Feige gave them the idea to tie in that to tie in that plot line in Agent Carter with the Black Widow program. He said, hey, wouldn't this be good to tie into the Red Room and these things?
Yeah.
And
That's
Kevin
true.
Feige's on record, too, being like, it's great how they're tying into the movies. It's great how they're interweaving the continuities about how they're bouncing off things that we've done. So he is applauded, and as well, he's tweeted when someone asked him, or he didn't tweet, it was at a similar Q&A that became a tweet, but someone asked him, you know, it was something like, do you think, to the point of these Marvel shows, you know, Moon Knight, Loki, WandaVision, Falcon and Winter Soldier, these are going to be the best TV shows ever or whatever, like the best Marvel shows, like they're going to be super good. And Kevin Feige said, well, I think there's a bunch of Daredevil, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Punisher, etc. fans that would take issue with that. So he himself, and he said he's a fan of the shows. I mean, I think it's really silly to look at all of that, to look at that case that has been presented, and go like, they're probably multiversal variants from another reality.
Yeah.
So
I think one of the biggest connections we could possibly have between these shows and the greater universe is actually really early on in the MCU. Age of Ultron, that giant helicarrier that showed up at the end, that was because of the events of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yep.
Like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. ended, and it had a direct lead into Age of Ultron. And even the Avengers official Twitter tweeted out that, I have it here, it's all connected. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. into Age of Ultron. Like, it's literally, they built these two things together.
Right. The helicarrier, because S.H.I.E.L.D. fell in Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
The helicarrier that it was provided to the Avengers at the end of the movie was done so by the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. cast and crew. And even in the Wakanda Files, which is an official MCU guidebook that was released in like 2020, stated that Fury was loaned the helicarrier from some old friends. And, you know, he says that much in the movie. He says, what does he say? An old friend or some friends of mine? Mm-hmm. That was officially recognized to be due to the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. The Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show and those characters. So that is a tangible, fully acknowledged, officially acknowledged connection in terms of the universe's perception of the
story.
Universe.
I mean, it affects the story.
Yeah, it just happens. It just happens.
And it's a big plot point. It was like the big triumphant moment at the end of the movie. Like, all these people are dying, yada, yada, yada. Oh, the helicarriers arrived, and now we can evacuate all these people. Like, it was really important. So it wasn't just it wasn't even just a little reference. It was like a major part of the story.
Like, you're gonna look at that, like, where they get the helicarrier from, and I'm pretty sure Kevin Feige, they also asked him something like that. And we have all of this, everything and anything that I've mentioned or will mention so far, I have a citation for, and it can be shown at any point. But I believe somebody asked Kevin Feige, they're like, hey, what's going on with this, and this about in the MCU? And he's like, I think you will find the answers on your television set. And then he said, like, the time and the day that
on 4/28/15 at 8/7 Central.
Yeah. He said that about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So yeah, I mean, Blaze Cap in the chat. Pretty sure Josh Whedon made that connection or requested that connection. See, whether or not I'm not sure if you're saying that to be like, yeah, just that's like a cool fun fact, but for detractors, the Avengers Twitter is saying this, and Kevin Feige is just backing it up. So Whether or not who requested or who had the idea to do it, it's just been fully officially acknowledged in multiple different sources. So,
Yep. Yes, in chat had asked if there was like a Shang-Chi Iron Fist overlap. There's nothing like direct, but there's sort of like general connections that you can draw between the two. Like Talo and Kunlun are both exist in a dimension outside of our own. Obviously, both have their separate dragon, the Great Protector and Xiao Lao. They train like super secret martial arts, yada yada yada. Like there are a ton of different connections, sort of like that. You can only get to the dimension at a certain time, at a certain place, through a hidden path. Like they're both basically the same thing. They could each be one of the 7 capital cities of heaven, for all we know, but they're like, there's sort of that, I guess, connection. There's nothing direct, but they're basically the same place.
yeah, they seem at the very least influenced by the same sort of source material, the same kind of concepts. But
Yeah, I think out of everything we've talked about, we talked about like what the easiest connection to make is. Daredevil's up there, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is up there, Agent Carter is up there. Some of the harder ones to make would be something like The Runaways, Cloak and Dagger. But as I mentioned, Crisis had also mentioned, there are multiple connections between these various shows and then direct connections, excuse me, to the movies. The Dark Dimension is like the most explicit one. But yeah, season 3 kind of screws with that a little bit, but like Nico's mom, Nico's a main character. Her mother is a character that's in Doctor Strange. That was trained at Kunlun, or not Kunlun.
there's so many secret magic places.
Do you remember what it's called?
Kamartaj.
Kamartaj, yeah. Both start with a K. Kamartaj. And we see that in the Doctor Strange prequel comic, and that's where she gets the Staff of One. That was an artifact that was in Kamartaj, one of the artifacts there. So that's another direct connection. And then Nico goes out and trains with a master of the mystic arts to master her magical abilities, and then can cast magic like the sorcerers do in Doctor Strange. So that happens in season 3. But there are those direct connections to the movies, not as strong as the Helicarrier connection, but still connections. They talk about Wakanda and things like that as well. And then there are just blatant connections to other shows, Cloak and Dagger.
Well, here's the thing too.
Go ahead.
Not to cut you off, but like Daredevil and Kingpin are in scenes with movie act, like they're he does a scene with Tom Holland and he says Tony Stark, like, you have to go out of your way to make an assumption that they're multiversal variants. You have to go out of your way to do that. As it stands right now, that's just Matt Murdock. Like, there's nowhere in the movie, there's nowhere on Twitter, on the website, any creative person, nothing that they've said supports that idea. That is strictly people who don't want it to be so, making up a reason for it not to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it is.
Yeah. And it's kind of frustrating that, I mean, I don't know how long we've been talking about this, but like 44 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating that we even need to, but we've just been laying out, I think, a pretty strong case in the favor of them being canon. Now, I guess to be fair, and we do know the talking points of the opposition, obviously, or we wouldn't be able to, speak on the topic, in an educated manner much at all. But
Yeah.
some of their biggest points are really, we've talked about a few of them, but they're really flimsy for the most part. A lot of it is sort of like conjecture and, like Chris has said, making really wild assumptions. Like the Defenders series isn't listed in like Marvel Phase 2 or Phase whatever it would have aired on Disney Plus, or different things like that, which also isn't direct evidence of anything. They just have their own sort of section because there's a lot of different shows. I think that probably makes the most sense instead of putting them all in like the different phases or whatever. But like the Defenders, it's called the Defenders Saga, is it not? On Disney Plus.
It is, yeah.
So
It
I
is.
mean that's the same naming convention as the Infinity Saga. So I just don't think they have any direct evidence of anyone ever making the claim that they're not canon, other than the James Gunn comment. But we have like Kevin Feige comments saying otherwise.
Right.
But I think the biggest like in-universe points that they could ever make would be like the time travel towards the end of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and The Runaways, which works, not the way it was portrayed as, how it was supposed to work in Endgame.
Right.
But
Yeah, what I would say to that is the time travel logic in the MCU it kind of contradicts itself as well. For instance, the writers and directors of Endgame have a completely different interpretation of Captain America and like what his fate, and what happened there. So there is some wiggle room in terms of approaching that, but yeah, those definitely are the weirdest sort of disconnects that are there. But I mean, like the man Vincent D'Onofrio said, they're going to connect as many dots as possible, and sometimes you don't connect everything. Sometimes we will never know what happened to the leader in a movie. They're never going to show that. There's a time comic, but we're never going to see what happened to the leader in Incredible Hulk.
right.
More than likely.
Yeah,
But
somebody had mentioned that in the chat that Agent Carter was listed in Legacy on Disney Plus with X-Men.
yeah, I'm looking right now.
Yeah, I was just about to say, just pull it up and see.
There's Marvel on. I think they're different per region, but Marvel Legacy Movies has the X-Men and Fantastic Four, and then there isn't a Marvel Legacy series. There's Marvel Legacy Animation, which has like Spider-Man '94 and the '90s X-Men show, but Marvel series and specials has Moon Knight, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Marvel Studios Assembled, and then some things like interviews from comic creators, Agent Carter, Inhumans, Hawkeye, Loki, things like that. And then there's also the matter of fact that there's little things like in the mobile game that uses skins from the Defender Saga versions of the characters. They are called Marvel Studios Daredevil, Marvel Studios Iron Fist, Marvel Studios Luke Cage, and even more recently, like days ago, on Twitter, Disney Plus was doing I believe it was Women's Day. They had the actress, she's in The Mandalorian, she's in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., doing talking about all the roles she's portrayed of playing. Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
Playing prominent women across Disney, and
Mulan,
they
shout
just
out.
exactly. I didn't know that before seeing the video. They call Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Marvel Studios Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and it's right there. You'd have to go out of your way to
Right.
write that. If you're gonna look up Agents of Shield, you're gonna copy paste, Agents of Shield, Marvel Agents of Shield. They put Marvel Studios Agents of Shield. So little things like that I would probably say are about as, the same level of like, okay, well, Kevin Feige's at the top. For most people, you say whatever he says is probably, that's just the case.
Yeah.
I would say that in terms of that, Disney Plus and, the Twitter ads they make are the same level of validity, or, sway that would have in a person's mind. They're calling these things Marvel Studios properties. So,
Yeah. I'd say at the end of the day, like, if you really don't feel like fighting for them being canon, you could just be like, okay, I guess, sure, whatever. But, like, all the movies are canon to the shows anyway, so they're all canon to one another. Even if you want to say it's a parallel universe that's exactly the same, but outside of whatever universe these people have made up in their heads, then sure.
Right.
But, like, they do all exist in one universe in one way or another. If you want to say there's one universe that exists and it's just movie canon, go ahead, but that's just kind of weirdo behavior in my opinion.
Yeah, it's just placating some, like, the core
Bias.
of your bias. Yeah.
It's weird.
But yeah, and I mean, there really is so much to say. Somebody earlier in the chat mentioned how the actress who plays Colleen Wing, is that right, from Iron Fist,
She
got
was offered
an
a role in Eternals, right? But not Eternals, Shang-Chi, and turned it down.
Right. And the thing about that is, we have actors in the movies who have been recast to play this, like, different roles, and not like, oh, blink it, you miss it. They're just background extras. One of the Star Force Kree, members in Captain Marvel is who is it? Cersei, yeah. In Eternals, yeah. So, same, and not to mention the fact that, like, Incredible Hulk is canon, but Mark Ruffalo is not Edward Norton, so.
Yeah. Don Cheadle is.
Like, is Iron Man 2 not canon? Is Incredible Hulk not canon? Or are those also in a different universe where.
But there's a universe that exists where Iron Man 1 happened exactly how it did, but it's Don Cheadle.
Yes, is that the timeline that we're in now? Like, this is like huffing paint at that point. So, yeah, I just it's frustrating, and I think it's ultimately silly. Because let's think about it from just a practical perspective. Marvel has been marketing the Defender series, like, constantly. The Defender saga and Agents of Shield, they've been marketing them nonstop since they've been moved to Disney Plus.
Yeah,
you can
been
watch
running commercials like prime time NBA games.
Yeah.
I was watching the other day, like the Nets Mavericks game, which is a huge game, and they just were advertising Daredevil and Punisher and all that stuff.
In 2022, Disney wants you to watch these shows. They want you to get invested in them. They want you to get emotionally invested in them. They're getting these actors back. They're getting the actor who played Iron Fist. They're getting the actor who played Billy Russo in Punisher. They're getting these guys back to be like, hey, watch this on Disney Plus. Do you really think they're just going to say it's all a different, it's all not canon? Like, they're not going to, they don't want you to, this isn't leading to something at all. Like, I think that's really silly. Like, just in a practical, not even making, like, weird arguments back and forth. Like, I don't know, man. Just be real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can't really speak to Inhumans personally because I haven't seen it, but I have seen literally every other show that we've been talking about. What was it, last year or the year before? I, like, binged everything back to back to make, like, a bunch of videos.
So, I don't think it does anything. I mean, I don't think it does anything, like, too crazy. They're not like blowing up, countries or anything that would have to have something be brought attention to. But,
I mean, another big argument is why don't they interconnect more, in the sense that I think the biggest one that's brought up is there's a massive earthquake in Defenders in New York City, and like we never hear about like Iron Man or anybody investigating the situation or trying to figure out what's going on. And hell, maybe they could have off screen, but like it's not ever directly mentioned in any of the movies, where like after this happens, Iron Man shows up. He's like, "You remember that earthquake? That shit was kind of crazy. Whatever happened with that?" Right? I'm sure, maybe they figured it out, or Damage Control moved in. I guess Iron Man owns that, and like dug up Midland Circle and like figured out what was there, and that was the end of it. But within the own movies, they don't even do this. Like Thor is fighting dark elves in London, and it's none of the other
a spaceship hovering over London for hours, and Iron Man doesn't like fly to help.
Be like, "Hey, what's going on, bro?" So I mean, it's something that happened, especially early on, Phase 1, Phase 2. Now the movie characters, it seems like no one can get a solo movie anymore unless they're brand new, and even then, like Nick Fury and Coulson were both in, Captain Marvel, and Wong showed up in Shang-Chi, and so it's like they never have any standalone adventures like really anymore. But early on, it was like that all the time. Like shit would be popping off, and nobody would come or help or do anything. So I'm not sure how much water that argument holds.
There's also the fact, and like you mentioned before, in the defense, like let's say there are two different universes. If you watch the Defenders saga or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., if you consider all that in the same universe, which I think most people would, even if they say it's not canon to the MCU, they probably agree that they're all happening in the same world, like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Daredevil. Those shows canonize the events of the movies. So even if you make that argument, that like, oh, why didn't Iron Man show up in when all that stuff in Defenders was happening? Why didn't it can't be canon to Marvel Studios? It can't be canon to the MCU. We know there is a Iron Man that experienced Iron Man 1, 2, 3, Avengers 1, Avengers 2, and Infinity War that exists concurrent to those events, and that guy doesn't show up. Mm-hmm. So now what? Is Daredevil not canon to itself? Like what does the argument become at that point for Iron Man not showing up? And that is to say that no matter what you do, if you say it's canon or if it's not, you have to make some excuse. You have to assume something. It just is because Iron Man's not there. You have to think, why isn't he there? You have to come up with some reason if it's bothering you that badly. If you really
care about it, it's just like, don't worry about it. He's just not there. You don't need to know why. Okay, it's not important. He's not there.
You have to make an excuse either way.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's not a contradiction. It doesn't contradict anything, because even when watching Defenders, you have to think of something. Like, I mean, yeah, I think that's just a silly thing. And again, these are based on comic books, and the MCU, even apart from the shows, is already so expansive at this point.
Yeah. That
it's going to look more and more and more like the landscape from the comics, wherein there's so many events that have explosions going off. There's like 78 superheroes in New York City alone on the same island.
Yeah,
and
right.
They aren't always helping each other out. They aren't always interconnecting. But you're not going to be like, oh, well, Moon Knight 643 is a canon to Amazing Spider-Man 764 because there's a big explosion in Times Square. He doesn't show up.
Yeah. There's, and that's such an annoying complaint. And again, we think it's pretty silly, but it's a loud complaint. Like, a lot of people say it, even though it's not worth saying. Like, people bring it up all the time. It's the CinemaSins fucking mentality, man, where it's just like, let's nitpick and like go over everything with a fine-tooth comb to the point where just nothing's fun anymore and everything fucking sucks.
It's reductive. Reductive.
Yeah, so even Marvel Studios now is going out of their way to answer these questions. It's okay.
Yeah.
Well, Shang-Chi's in San Francisco, and that's so far away from everybody that, let's take them off the grid completely, right?
Yeah,
And
Spider-Man can't swing to, if there's if the train scene in Shang-Chi happened in New York, you'd say, well, why isn't Spider-Man here?
Spider-Man
You
could be
know,
in school. He could be in class and not make it there in time before it's over. Like, who knows?
there's so many reasons why
Yeah,
people
exactly.
can't show
But
up.
even in Spider-Man Far From Home, they had to build in this excuse. Well, where's Captain Marvel? Off-world. Where's Thor? Who knows? Like, you're the only guy, Spider-Man. That's why we're calling you. They specifically
Yeah.
went out of their way to say, only Spider-Man can do this. Do not ask us why X, Y, or Z was not here instead of him. He's the least
And that's
experienced. We
just
get it. But this
and
is
that's
the movie.
just the movies. That's just the
Exactly.
movies.
So it's
They're all-
like,
yeah,
it's such an annoying, like, crybaby type thing. But
yeah. And also because it came to my mind, WHIH, which is the like made up news bureau, daytime news for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There was a web series that was officially produced by Marvel Studios. It features Christine Everhart from Iron Man 1 reprising her role. And there's a part where they talk about the Civil War, and they interview Paul Rudd's Ant-Man. In the byline of that web series that was made by Marvel Studios, they explicitly reference the ATCU attack that occurred in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 3. And the ATCU as well, that can only be a reference to, it's such a blatant reference to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. That you'd have to be disingenuous to say otherwise. And so that's another thing like the helicarrier where people say that there's no interconnectivity. And I'll agree, it's pretty mild, up until Matt Murdock showing up, which he probably couldn't because of legal red tape.
yeah.
But now, and again, what frustrates
And
me
even
the most.
before that, just speaking of Daredevil real quick, I mean,
Uh-huh.
this is kind of out of universe, but explicitly meant to be within the MCU is Flash Thompson's Instagram account where he references being saved by Daredevil.
Yeah, he draws Daredevil on like a little Snapchat thing. They're doing a promotional thing for the Spider-Man movies and had like a little
Yeah,
Snapchat or
can
Instagram account.
bring that up real quick just so chat can see it too.
Yeah, so and that's probably because legally that's all they could do. But and here's another. Okay, so there are 2 points I want to off the top of my head. Number one is okay. So imagine you're reading a piece of media. Let's say you're reading like a Batman comic book,
Mm-hmm.
and the Frankenstein monster shows up, and they reference like Dr. Frankenstein and all this. You'd go, oh, okay, so Frankenstein is canon to like those events happen in the DC Comics universe. Even if Frankenstein isn't owned by DC, even if you would say, okay, well, Frankenstein just on its own, the sequel to Frankenstein isn't a Batman comic when you're reading the novel, those events are still being acknowledged and treated as such by that other piece of media. So in this case, the Marvel Studios, even if they're like a separate corporate entity for Marvel Entertainment at the time, which they are no longer, they are one thing now, they're totally in control of those properties, you can still acknowledge, you can still weave those elements in from other pieces of material. You could still have that take place where they acknowledge another story that they don't necessarily own, but can then thus far be assumed to be canon to that piece of material. But I had something else that slipped my mind. And I hope the takeaway from this. Oh, I think somebody commented. They commented about they don't address why. Oh, two things. Somebody mentioned the Terrigen Mist and why they don't acknowledge that, and why the shows don't acknowledge the snap. Would you maybe want to cover?
For the Terrigen Mist, I mean, that was like a pretty widespread event, but also like S.H.I.E.L.D. was pretty on top of it. Like, they were on the front lines of all of these situations, and it's not like the Avengers are like investigative people. You know, they're not going out and chasing leads and like tracking down like mysterious some hole was blown in the side of a building, right? That's not something that would be on their radar at any point ever. And that was really like the level of stuff we were sort of dealing with in terms of like Inhumans popping up and being, you know, any sort of threat at all. It was sort of Shield sort of getting out ahead of that and dealing with it before it became such a massive issue that, you know, the Avengers would have to get involved in some sort of way. But I was hoping we would get like a very definitive answer with Miss Marvel, but she's not going to be an Inhuman, so it doesn't matter. But yeah.
There's also the fact that we now have in the MCU a hidden race of people that have been shaping human history, the Eternals. We also know Thor has known about them this whole time and has never brought them up, ever.
Right, yeah, true.
So, for all that we know, they could have been aware of it and were like, hey, the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. did this, dealt with it. Now, the other thing that was brought up in the comments was the snap. And I think ultimately the reason why they didn't acknowledge the snap comes down to practicality, like I mentioned earlier, where they would run the risk of spoiling the movie or spoiling elements of the movie that was yet to come out.
Right.
So that's why they are most likely didn't acknowledge it in things like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. For Daredevil and for most of the other shows, it's pretty fair to say they just take place before the snap. But Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., there are two things regarding that. For one, I believe it's season 5 and onward until the finale, and they make a plot point about using the quantum realm to go back to their original timeline. They're in a different one from that point forward. So in that timeline, the snap could have easily just gone differently. It could have been one of the, infinite other universes that Strange didn't see besides those 14 million. So that's a fairly least amount of assumptions explanation. Another one is that we know for a fact that they did reach a pretty Sword was operating post snap, between everybody being revived, and you have diners Hulk, you can go to an IHOP after the snap. Hulk can go order some grits. So eventually society kind of leveled out where you still had institutions and you still had things functioning. There was a period there where it was dark, but I don't think, and also people will say, well, isn't it convenient then that none of the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. got snapped or died or anything? Isn't it convenient that all the original 6 Avengers didn't get snapped? Isn't that it's just
true.
It's these are not strong counter arguments. And again, ultimately, and I think we've said enough, but in that we've built this case where, think about it from a detractor's perspective. We've presented Kevin Feige having all these statements, Kevin Feige being involved in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Agent Carter, all of the shows connecting to one each other tangibly. There being tangible connections between the shows and the movies. No evidence anywhere saying that Matt Murdock or Kingpin are variants. In fact, evidence to the contrary with the Kingpin entry on the website. And Vincent D'Onofrio saying, yeah, seasons 1 through 3 were treated by the writers as the history for that Kingpin. All of these things, you have to consider all of that. And from there, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If you're going to look at all of these things, you have to present something incomparable in scope and breadth and depth to make a solid counter argument. But what a lot of these people will do is they'll hear all this, they'll accept it, and then they'll go but in the Runaways, time travel's different.
Right.
And it's dog. There's
Plus,
a preponderance of evidence.
There's also a vastly smaller amount of evidence, and also you have to some of the evidence is really just you complaining about them not being connected enough, but the contradictions within the show are vastly outnumbered by the connections between the shows
Right.
and to the movies, and very solidly so, as we've mentioned over the course of like the past hour.
Right. So I think if you're going to be logical and in the side of that, if you're still on the edge, let's not go, oh well, they're variants until they are shown to be canon or stated to be canon. Let's take the logical, proven approach that they are canon, they are the same versions. It's not a different universe until Wanda says no more Defenders and the multiverse changes, and something happens.
Right.
That makes sense to me. Makes more sense to me. I think most people could agree with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we said all we needed to say, addressed most of everything that was mentioned in the chat as far as like the canonicity of the various things and the connections and all that. So yeah.
And we may very well do a proper structured. I would love to do a proper structured documentary style.
Yeah,
video.
That would probably be for the best, but
I think that's somewhere down the pipeline. But yeah,
we'll see where that goes. But yeah, thanks for hopping on the stream. I'm gonna talk about. I mean, unless you guys want to stay on, talk about this Jared Leto stuff.